Hello friends, it's Mr. E here, and today I'd like to talk about the Psyker. The Psyker is a class that I think is the most powerful class in Darktide right now, and hopefully I'll be able to explain to you why I believe that today. I know there's a lot of people out there that don't yet believe me, that aren't fully signed on to the Psyker OP sort of train, but hopefully I'll be able to kind of get that through your skulls by the end of the argument here today. But this video is mainly about how I would rework the Psyker, how I would change him up to make him a better build or make him more enjoyable for most players. And yeah, hopefully that is a cool discussion to have. I know there are more potential changes on the way for Psyker. I've heard as much from Fatshark. We've all seen the posts about them, talking about how these reworks are not the final phase for these characters, specifically the ones that went out to Veteran, Psyker, and Zealot in fall of last year. And so we can anticipate more changes. I'm just hoping, personally, that they are on a little bit more of the balanced side, because so far, personally, I believe that Psyker has received really favorable treatment. And by that, I mean he has been given buffs where other classes have actually been nerfed, and I just don't think it's fair at all. We are entering into a paradigm where we have characters who have taken his mantle as the quote-unquote glass cannon, right? The Hive Scum is now the glass cannon of the game, but yet Psyker still reigns supreme as the most canon. So we have lost a little bit of that glass element, and he still retains all the damage or more than he's ever had. And I just don't think that's a good way to design a character. Now, a lot of this is going to come down to discussing, of course, the flame staff, but I don't want this to be a sort of referendum on the flame staff today. I'll talk about weapons on a different day for classes if I choose to. But you know, this is sort of the shadow that looms over the conversation, is we have a character in the game that has an unlimited ammo, no reload flamethrower, and that is going to be really, really hard to balance. And it is proven so for Fatshark for a couple years now, is that balancing this character has been a nightmare. And to further explain why I think balancing this character is really difficult, I did the liberty of spending a couple hours putting together this graphical representation of some statistics here. So here you can see the power experience curve, and this is for Psyker players, but it also applies to Hive Scum players. And what this means is when you are at a low level of experience, so when you're going this way and you have like low to mid levels of experience, your power, the amount of power that you can expound or just apply to the enemies is going to be low, because two things. Firstly, you don't have very much experience, right? Psyker's a difficult class to play, and no two bones about it. They are quite tricky because you have to manage an extra resource, you have to manage your spacing around enemies, you aren't all that tanky, so yeah, you can get caught out, and that learning process is hard. No, I won't dispute that. But the same thing, at the same time, you are also in games where there aren't that many enemies afoot. So if you're playing in Heresy difficulty or less, a lot of times it can be difficult to see the value of a Psyker compared to something like the Arbites, because the Arbites can face roll through an entire game on those difficulties. And Psyker has to worry about getting hit, and then you're still really not dealing all that much more damage if you are dealing any more damage. However, as your skill and experience continue to grow, and the enemy challenge gets greater and greater, and the numbers of enemies multiply, that is when the Psyker really sort of takes off, when it ascends. Because once you reach the threshold where you no longer are worried about, oh, I'm going to overload myself, and instead you are just constantly casting and churning out damage, or you understand spacing and are able to stay away from enemies and not have to worry about spending half your time running around the arena blocking and dodging. Once you are across that gap, and you've entered into the territory where, we're talking about Damnation, Auric, and Havoc and beyond, where there's just so many enemies in the arena, the value of the Psyker goes through the roof, because the Psyker is the king, the undisputed king of area destruction. This class can nuke down 10,000 enemies as easily as he can nuke one, and therefore things like Smite, Venting Shriek, Flame Staff, Force Greatsword, all of these weapons are amazing at just absolutely destroying Vaz Swazwa Horde. They do really effective damage into most types of targets, and they are just top performers in the field, period, end of story. So you end up with a situation where this class goes from being kind of weak feeling to, oh my god, I'm a living demon. If you don't believe me, look at the footage that's going on behind you, right? This will be stitched together from a couple games, but I'm able just to without question, just run around and burn everything to death. There's no counterplay for the enemies against me, because this class can become that powerful once you understand how to fundamentally play it. So this poses a really difficult challenge for Fatshark, which is that if we had this green line that represents the hypothetical perfect balanced class, it's completely hypothetical, of course, then what do you need to do in order to get players to feel like this class is balanced? Well, for a lot of players, which I would guess that down here is probably 90% of players in this cohort, the low experience players, low to mid experience, these players need a buff. And what that does is it moves the whole curve up by that same amount. So players who were already up here or here will then get moved up by that amount. And that is what happened to me, in fact, because, a year plus ago, I was a Psyker hater. I didn't believe in the power of Psyker, but then they buffed him last fall and I was like, oh shit. Okay, yeah, he's broken. And he was already pretty much kind of there, but that put me over that line where I could finally see, like, my experience level was enough to finally trigger the latent powers of the Psyker, and it made him go, ascended Super Saiyan 18 mode, and I haven't really looked back since. So this is the problem here, is because if you need to buff to get these low to mid experience players up, which is a lot of the player base, then you're gonna be sending these players on a trip to the fucking moon in terms of power, and then it looks bad when you get to late game and the Psyker is dealing 2 or 3 times everybody else's damage, just casually, while using bubble. So yeah, that's the problem here for Psyker, and I don't necessarily have any solutions for Fatshark for this. This is a problem that the Hive Scum has as well, where the new player experience is absolutely cheeks, and then you look at the performance of players who are playing Hive Scum at a high level, like in Havoc 40 or whatever, and they can just, absolutely do disgusting melee damage, and the rocket launcher is bonkers, and the Tox pistol is bonkers, and the Tox grenade is bonkers. Like, he's got a lot of crazy utility and crazy power, but getting there and unlocking it is a real struggle for many characters, or for many players, and that is going to be at the crux of the problem with balancing him going forward. But that's just to put that out there, and if you don't understand why I'm saying the Psyker is so powerful, I think there's a good chance you might be down here, right? You might not yet have the experience level to understand or be playing at the difficulty where it is relevant, the Psyker's strengths. And then those strengths just become the dominant strengths in the game when you pass that. Okay, let's move on here, and I'll bring up the talent tree and we'll discuss the meat and potatoes of today's video, which will be talking about how I would rebalance the stuff in the talent tree. As I mentioned previously, or I think I did at least, I don't really want to spend too much time, wringing our hands about the weaponry. I can talk about that in a different video. We'll just assume that I'm going to be using the best possible weaponry, so like Force Greatsword, Dueling Sword, the Flame Staff. Yeah, that's pretty much it. And then we'll just talk about that in the vagaries otherwise. At the top of the tree here, we have a nice little complement of toughness, regeneration talents. I think this is very nice. This is sort of how classes should be designed. They forgot this lesson when they did the Hive Scum, and they initially launched that tree for us that was completely reversed, where all the toughness regeneration was at the bottom, and that went pretty much as well as you'd think it would, because every player was fucking dying at like level 2. So we have all these regeneration talents up here, and any good build is going to be using like 2 or maybe even 3 of them at one time to generate tons of toughness. Now this made a lot of sense back when the Psyker was kind of a very squishy class. He didn't have a whole lot of base toughness and not a whole lot of toughness damage reduction, and so yeah, he could get hurt, but then he'd need to use his very exceptional toughness regeneration to get it back quickly. And that has kind of been, the waters in that have been muddied over the years, because now he actually has 125 base toughness. He has, well, when you're fully leveled, you have 75 here, you have 25 here, and you have 25 down here, which adds up to 125, and that gets further multiplied by all of your curios and such. He's honestly not that squishy at all anymore, plus he can pick up toughness damage reduction across the tree in a variety of ways, and he also can dodge and evade a ton of damage. So yeah, this character is not all that squishy anymore, and has tons of regeneration. And first of all, like the biggest thing the Psyker has going is he is very hard to pin down once you get skills, is he can stop enemies from getting to him. He can keep that 20-foot gap on enemies when he's playing in range mode with stabs and just annihilate them from that range, or he can go into melee and be so slippery and so fast that many things can't even touch him. And I don't think I would change anything up here, but just to say, like, you know, we have a ton of regeneration on a class that is already doing fine. Like, you know, a site of like Ogren would love to have some of this additional like regeneration over time talents. Just saying. Let's talk about blitzes for a second. My main problem with the blitzes, and let me know, sound off if you agree. My main problem with the blitzes on this class is it feels too much like when I am committing to use a blitz on this class, it's like that's what the build is just gonna be, right? It's very seldom that I feel like I get to use an assail on a Psyker where it's not just like, oh, the build is just gonna be a sail, right? The same thing, or even doubly or triply applies to smite. If you're running smite in your build, you're just smiting. Like, there's really nothing else that matters about your build because smite just defines the build. And head pop is kind of a weird one in that regard, where I guess you could do a build that's all around head pop, but people almost really never use it. People pretty much only select Brain Rapture to get Kinetic Flare in my experience, and you might use it, you know, I use it like a couple times a game to get annoying far off snipers, but I really wish, and this is just a pipe dream, but I really wish these blitzes were reformatted to be what a blitz implies, right? A blitz implies a fast attack. That is what the blitz was for the Germans, right? So it's a fast attack, and that's what blitzes are supposed to be in terms of the other abilities in the game. They are a resource that you spend that quickly changes something in the game. So think about, like, you know, a flashbang or a rocket launcher or a knife. Like, they come out fast, they have a profound effect. Bada bing, bada boom, that's a blitz. These ones just completely upend your entire build, and they're just like, okay, you're just playing smite now. You're just playing assail now. It just completely hijacks the entire build, and I don't really love that from a design perspective. And the one I really hate the most is smite. Even though, you know, of course I'm famous. I don't know if I'm famous for this, but, like, you know, I have builds and I tend to, you know, I like exploiting the game with smite because you can just shut everything down and win the game automatically a lot of times, but it feels stupid and it feels boring, and it's like powerful and boring at that terrible crossroads of being OP and boring that, Chorus of Spiritual Fortitude was at a while back, where you would constantly have the cooldown up for Chorus, and so you never had any threats from any enemies, but at the same time, you were just standing around for 7 seconds at a time. Smite is that, but even worse, because you were standing around for 30 seconds at a time, smiting, and doing nothing, while the enemies also do nothing and take a bajillion damage. And yeah, that's just not really healthy for balance. Not that people really tend to exploit it because it feels like cheap. I think that's a big reason why players don't use smite, is because it feels like cheating. And it just, like, man, it is a boring way to play. It really sucks. So what I would really like to see out of these blitzes is to really make them more kind of like Assail is, where Assail is something you can quickly throw out and get some effect from and then go back to what you were doing. I would love it if Smite was actually converted to an offhand zap where you could electrify an enemy and therefore open up their shield or open up their defense, right? You could just, you know, touch an enemy or cast like a short range spell on them, and now that enemy is electrified and immobilized. It costs a little bit of peril, and there you go. And it has like a short cooldown or something like that as well. So you can weave that in when you're playing melee. Right now, both Head Pop and Smite are pretty much unable to be weaved into any other style of play other than by using Kinetic Flare here. The one thing I do want is Charge Flare or Charge Strike to be moved outside of this, because I think this is cool. I think the idea of having your psychokinetic power imbuing your blade with different elements. Imagine like a talent that made it so that all of your melee attacks will now apply 1 stack of soulblaze. However, you will gain 5 peril per melee attack or something, right? That would be really, really cool, and it would open up different avenues for different builds. That should be independent of this ability, so you can start to get that and like electrify all enemies hit, you know, without having to force yourself into smite. Okay, moving past this into this little crown shaped section here. I've always thought this looks like a crown. This right here, Mind in Motion and Channel Force here, these sort of talents are remnants of the days past, where I think that this is the thing that will probably come in and target when they inevitably do the final rework, or like a more thorough rework of the Psyker, which is that these talents are kind of holdovers from the old Psyker talent tree. They are remnants where we had, like, this talent used to be movement speed is not reduced while quelling, and then they added reloading to it. But like, who is choosing this, right? This is useless garbage. They have to look at the pick rates. I think hopefully they have the stats on that sort of stuff. Look at the heat map on the talent tree and be like, this, nobody picks this, because who needs this? This is not useful in any builds, and it is so weirdly specific. It doesn't add any power. It barely adds any utility. It's just a kind of a dead node. And the Psyker is a very strange class in that it has a lot of these dead nodes in it. And this is something that I think Tanner did a video about a while ago, making the literal worst build in the game, because he was able to make a build with a certain set of weapons and a certain set of talents that had zero cohesion, right? It literally had no effect on like anything he was holding. So he used like venting shriek with this node over here with warp rupture, and he had no way to generate peril in his build. So like you're venting no peril, and he like the mere fact that you can pick talents in a class and actually have almost every single talent be useless and have zero effect on your build, that you can build it that wrong, is probably not a great sign. I think that it would be much better if we had more generalist talents that were applicable to many more different types of weapons and builds in the Psyker class, because that gives you more variety, right? And so you get talents like Channeled Force here, which is really only good with like 1, maybe 2 staves. And again, it's only used with staves, of which there are only 4 out of the Psyker's, I don't know, like 16 ranged weapons. So it kind of excludes all guns, which sucks. Okay, let's move down here and talk about auras. Auras are fine in this class. I don't have any notes. Seer's Presence is the most powerful one. Obviously 10% CDR is OP, but hey, you know, let's give them something, because Psyker certainly is hurting these days. Okay, Immaterial Focus, one with the Warp, Justice Dream, Anticipation, all fine. Great, some nice extra durability plus some evasion. That makes sense. Then we got to turn our gaze to Empathic Evasion. Empathic Evasion is a problem talent. And the reason Empathic Evasion is a problem is because this is a talent that does not belong on a Psyker. This talent belongs on Zealot or Hive Scum or anybody else, right? The problem here is that this is a full immunity. This gives you the dodging effect against all ranged attacks for 1 second when you get a critical hit. The Psyker is a very, very easy class to get critical hits with. And the fact that you can do these critical hits with a Flame Staff, with a Force Greatsword, with literally any weapon, means that the Psyker just effectively gets ranged attack immunity as long as they are attacking, which is sort of your primary role. And so Psykers, once they pass that certain point on the curve, once they pass a certain skill point and they realize, oh, I just need to walk out there and start attacking enemies and then no one will be able to shoot me, that unlocks a very toxic potential. I would be fine if this talent had a damage reduction or something to that effect, but making it a full dodge, making it a full immunity is a really, really OP sort of thing. And if you think about it from that perspective, there's one class in the game that gets to dodge attacks like this, and that's the Hive Scum. And he has to use an ultimate ability to do it. He has to use Desperado in order to dodge range attacks like this. The Psyker gets to do it all the time, just for doing something they were already doing. So just put a little bit of crit in your build and you literally get to dodge all ranged attacks for free while being melee, while being ranged, whatever you want to do. And so this ends up making other classes just look bad. Like it's just not fair. Think about, from a melee perspective, think about the Psyker versus Ogryn matchup, right? Going into a melee combat, melee Psyker with Empathic Evasion, Scrier's Gaze, and an Ogryn, a melee DPS like Berserker Ogryn. First of all, the Psyker is going to have a much higher DPS than the Ogryn does, because balance, for whatever reason, is going to favor the Psyker. The Psyker is going to absolutely shrek on these enemies with damage, and they are at the same time going to be hitting lots of crits and therefore getting Empathic Evasion, which means they do not need to worry at all about the ranged enemies that are attacking them. They are only worried about dodging the melee enemies in front of them. The Ogryn has to take the same fight and deal less damage. He not only has to worry about the enemies in front of him that are attacking him, but now every range enemy this side of Timbuktu is also able to shoot him, and he has no way of shrugging off that damage. So yeah, this is a problem talent, because it steps on the toes of, what does it mean for this class to be a glass cannon? This class is supposed to be fragile and have high damage. Well, you've given them a talent that can enable them to dodge the sort of damage that would actually hit them, because this is a ranged class primarily. And so like, if you can just keep melee enemies away from you and keep getting crits, well, now you're invincible. So yeah, you've entered into Desperado Hive Scum territory, where as long as you're in Desperado and melee enemies can't touch you, you're invincible. This is just that, but all the time. So empathic evasion should just be a damage reduction at best, and not a full invincibility with dodging. That is that's toxic, right? That is completely over the line in terms of what a class should be able to do for defenses, especially a fragile class or ostensibly fragile class. But we have an even worse offender here, which is Psykinetics Aura. I need to show you something first before we talk about this. I need to show you the Veteran. The Veteran has a talent that gives them regeneration, right? It's all the way down here at the bottom. It's called Tactical Awareness. Tactical Awareness gives you 100% cooldown regeneration for 3 seconds on specialist enemy kill. Okay, so this talent got an Omega nerf in the fall patch of last year, at the same time that the Psyker got a change to their talent, Psykinetics Aura. The talent for Tactical Awareness used to be 6 flat seconds every time that you killed a specialist enemy. And of course that was broken, because if you killed 3 specialists, like 3 bursters that are clumped up together, you get 18 seconds of your ultimate back instantaneously. That was a little bit silly. So they nerfed it so that you can only get double cooldown regeneration for 3 seconds every 3 seconds when you, as the particular player who's playing the Veteran, kills that specialist, and only specialist, not elites, by the way. So what they did for the Psyker was he used to have this talent called Psykinetics Aura that when you got an elite kill as the Psyker, it would give you and all of your allies with incoherency, I think it started as 5 and then went to 4% of their cooldown back, which was amazing because sometimes you'd come up on a group of 10 or like 15 elites and the Psyker would flame staff them all down, and immediately everybody on the team gets 60% of their ult back. And Fatshark realized that, oh, well, that's crazy because certain ultimates getting their full duration back, like, you know, that shouldn't be allowed. And it was clearly part of their design goals for the fall update of last year to nerf the hell out of cooldown. Because what we saw with the Zealot was that chorus spam and Infinite Shroud Field went the way of the dinosaurs. They nerfed that all into the ground. They made it so you actually have to work in order to keep your cooldowns rolling, and they reduced the speed of the cooldowns by a lot. And the same thing happened here with the Veteran, with Tactical Awareness being moved to only 3 seconds every 3 seconds instead of 6 seconds literally whenever. And so they got massive nerfs. At the same time, however, the Psyker got a massive buff because the Psyker's Psykinetics Aura was actually changed to be 100% cooldown regeneration for 3 seconds when you or an ally in coherency kills an elite or specialist enemy. So this was the Veteran's effect, double cooldown for 3 seconds, but on any elite or specialist killed by you or any ally. So you didn't even have to get the kills. It was just anybody doing it. And so this just meant you got double cooldown, right? They quickly realized that this was too much because, you know, I realized that and took advantage of it and pumped out like 5 builds that were like infinite smite, infinite casting, which you can still do, by the way, because they barely nerfed the damn thing. And now you have 60% CDR for 5 seconds with those same criteria. You or an ally in coherency kills an elite or specialist enemy, which means that basically on any difficulty from like heresy on up, this is 100% uptime. This node is an auto include in literally every single Psyker build, right? And here's the problem with that. The Psyker already has fine cooldown reduction through a keystone that's in the bottom of the tree called Warp Siphon. You can get plenty of cooldown reduction down there. They also happen to have a 10% cooldown reduction aura. So the Psyker's already doing fine on cooldown, and they happen to have 3 of the absolute best abilities in the game. Venting Shriek, Telekind Shield, and Scrier's Gaze are all S tier abilities, which have very reasonably short cooldowns. And so you now have given a class that has reasonably short cooldowns that are on very powerful abilities, probably on the too good side of like the cooldown to power of ability ratio, and already has cooldown effects in their tree, even more cooldown. And so what happened in the fall patch? Like, that's a genuine question. We got the Veteran and the Zealot were taken out back and fucking just like hit with bricks. They were just had the shit kicked out of them, said, no, like, we're taking your fucking lunch money. Nerds, give us your fucking cooldown. Don't you ever bring that around here again, okay? We don't want to see any cooldown in this game. Oh, here you go, Psyker. Have a bunch of extra fucking cooldown reduction. So we ended up with the Psyker effectively having, when you tally this all up, by the way, if the Psyker is running Warp Siphon, and they're running Seer's Presence, and they're running Psykinetics Aura, and they have CDR Curios in their Curio slots, which you absolutely will once you're maxed out, you're looking at cutting your cooldowns by 2/3. You're looking at your cooldown for Scrier's Gaze being 8 seconds, a Telekine Shield being 15 seconds, and a Venting Shriek being 10 seconds. And that isn't at all unreasonable. I know it sounded like I was adding up a lot of stuff there, but this is a very, very common build, and it is almost impossible to not have cooldowns up as Psyker. It is something that blows my mind that the other classes were absolutely gutted in terms of cooldown reduction, and the Psyker got gifted a massive, massive addition to their cooldown reduction, and now they can just spam abilities like nobody else. And it just boggles the mind because the Psyker's abilities are so good and so strong, and they did not need this additional power. They did not need it in any way, shape, or form. And so now you can still do Infinite Smite. You can still literally never stop casting with Void Blast Staff, right? You can literally never stop casting with the Flame Staff because of Venting Shriek or even Scrier's Gaze. So like all this stuff is just unchaining the Psyker even further, and I don't understand why they got this huge, massive cooldown reduction buff when clearly Fatshark has analyzed and realized that cooldown reduction should not be a thing that every class has in droves. They have gone through great lengths to nerf that on every other class, and then the Psyker is just like gifted a huge heaping helping of it for free. So my main advocation for the tree, for anything on the Psyker tree, is that this cooldown reduction node should just go away. I think that it would make the class, in terms of the amount that you can spam these abilities, be so much more reasonable, and we might not even have to touch on the power of the abilities at all, because right now they're being buoyed by the fact that Psykinetics Aura alone just gives you, like, you know, what, 40% of your cooldown time is cut off effectively. Like they make your cooldown so much, it makes your cooldown so much faster, and it's just unreasonable that like you can do that. Because how do you balance, this is something that Fatshark realized, like how do you balance a class that has the ability to spam ultimates because it has become an ultimate bot? Well, you can't, right? You have to limit them so that they are actually having to do things that classes have to do to fight in this game, like, you know, melee enemies and, you know, attack enemies with range weapons or whatever, rather than just continually spamming Venting Shriek, continually spamming Scrier's Gaze and never worrying about that, right? So yeah, I think that that's the number one thing that has to go, and then we can talk about the abilities. And speaking of, let's talk about the abilities really quickly. Scrier's Gaze is a power creep, like just the absolute poster boy for power creep in Darktide. This ability has been buffed patch after patch after patch after patch, because what is happening is players at lower levels, because this is a purely offensive talent, they are not skilled yet enough to use it effectively and not die while doing so. But once you reach that modicum of skill, which is getting easier and easier with each patch because they're adding more and more defenses to Scrier's Gaze and to the class in general, well, then this class, or this ability becomes crazy, to the point where now Scrier's Gaze is just Rampage for the Hive Scum, but better, with 100% uptime, and it makes you 20% faster. And of course, you can free cast with Warp Unbound for 10 seconds after it's capped at the same time. So this gives you infinite casting, it makes you crazy fast, it gives incredible scaling with some of the best weapons in the game. It's just a power creep talent, and it has 0 cooldown, by the way. Like, it has almost no cooldown. It's one of the shortest cooldowns in the game, only beat out by Hold the Line on RBDs. Over here, so I don't know what I would do to this. Again, the first thing that needs to happen is Psykinetics Aura needs to go away, and then we can consider what we do. But Telekine Shield, I do have some ideas here. First of all, Telekine Shield, obviously, everyone loves the bubble. Everyone loves a bubble. It's real good. But the problem with the bubble is the bubble makes the other side over here, which has a potential, be irrelevant. And the bubble has, for whatever reason, the ability to make the bubble last longer than the regular shield does. So the bubble actually lasts 25 seconds, and the shield only lasts 17.5. So look at this. The Telekine Shield can get, with you take this node all the way over here, a 35-second cooldown, and has a 17.5 second duration. So if you do that math, that's 50% uptime, right? You'll have one shield up half the time. That's how the cooldown will work, if you have no other cooldown stuff going, obviously. And then over here with the Telekine Dome, you would have a 25-second dome with a 45-second cooldown, which is more than half the time. So the bubble, in addition to being a better effect because it regenerates and it blocks stuff because it's a geometry of the bubble is better than the geometry of the plane for this game, is a better uptime, which isn't fair. Like, this is a better ultimate, a better shaped ultimate, and it's less use, or it's more useful in more situations, but it has a longer uptime. So what they need to do is, first of all, they need to reverse that. This pane, the single slice or the single glass wall, should have the longer duration, and they should swap bolstered shield to here, to where enervation threshold is, to make it so that this thing which you obviously want to take, the decreased cooldown and 2 charges, isn't point taxed behind this one, which is like kind of maybe useful in some builds, right? This one is actually kind of like a double-edged sword. So swap those two and then give the duration over here. Bubble doesn't need to last 25 seconds, right? Bubble has plenty of uptime. A lot of times bubbles break before 25 seconds anyway, right? It wouldn't be that big of a nerf to it, and it would help to give the shield more use, because I would like to see the shield in my games. I think it's a cool idea. I just think that it's really, really weak in comparison to the bubble. I couldn't really see ever using it. Venting Shriek over here is a problem talent, because Venting Shriek is literally just a direct buff to, of course, the Flame Staff. This Venting Shriek is kind of like not much of anything to anything except for the Flame Staff. With any other staff, you would just go Scrier's Gaze, because it gives you unlimited casting for 10 seconds after you cap, which just means you can infinitely cast. But for Flame Staff, which is the most powerful staff, but most powerful weapon in the game hands down, you take Venting Shriek, and then you go over here and you grab Creeping Flames. Creeping Flames, when you are over 80% peril, puts 6 stacks of soulblaze on any enemies that are in front of your reticle out to like an absurd range. I think it's like 40 meters or something. And it goes through walls. It goes through any terrain on the map, and it applies 6 stacks of soulblaze to them, which is enough to kill most chaff enemies on non-havoc difficulties. So yeah, and this, by the way, overcaps the current cap of soulblaze. So if you are using this on cooldown, which keep in mind with Psychonetics Aura and all the things you'll have is like 10 seconds, you can creep up the number of soulblaze stacks above the intended 17 as the cap up to 23, and then up to 29. A little bit will fall off at a time, but it'll go up and up and up, and these scale exponentially. So Venting Shriek is a super short cooldown with a direct damage effect that can kill many smaller enemies outright, and it staggers. So you get a horde that's coming at you, and the Psyker blasts their Flame Staff towards it. They get a bunch of peril. It gets kind of close to them. They Venting Shriek on it, and now that entire horde is doomed to die within like 5 seconds at maximum. And the Psyker at the same time takes advantage of the fact that the whole horde is staggered, and they scoot their little butt away. And so the enemies have no chance of ever touching them. And guess what? 10 seconds later, Venting Shriek is up again. So the Psyker really isn't even in a danger of ever having to worry about what should be the one limiting factor for casting in this game, which should be the peril overloading, right? But instead, now you have an extra button to dump your peril nigh constantly. And so I like the idea of direct damage ultimates, don't get me wrong. I liked Bounty Hunter Salts in Vermintide 2 with his bounty hunting shot. I liked Sienna with her Flame Walk that dealt direct damage in the big boom and stuff like that. But Creeping Flames here is giving more power to the already most powerful archetype in the entire game, and I don't really understand why it necessarily needed that. So maybe that could be looked at. Okay, let's come down here and talk about this last leg of the show here. We have, of course, this segment here, which to me screams we weren't quite done with the talent tree yet. First of all, out of all of these, I could go through here right now and tell you which ones I will pretty much never pick and which ones I'll always pick. Pretty much never, pretty much never, pretty much never, pretty much always, pretty much never, pretty much never, always, never, always, 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 never. Right, there you go. So like that's more or less. Some of those nevers were like maybe 25% of the time I would choose, but most builds will use guaranteed this one, guaranteed that one, guaranteed that one. And then we have a bunch of like dead nodes down here. Like, look at this. First of all, look at the number of blue nodes that are in this tree. Just look at it all overall. This is what, 12, 18, 22, 27, 34. Okay, let's go to the Arbites. Okay, remember, we had 34, right? We got 8, 11, 15, 19, 20. And then each one of these trees has 8 in it. So that's 44, right? This is another 10 nodes. And there's no like minor nodes in here. So the Psykers like has very few blue nodes, and a lot of them are these minor garbage nodes. There's so many of these minor garbage nodes, especially down here. It tells me that they weren't quite finished. A lot of these are reused from the old talent tree. They were just moved in different spots. They're almost identical. So I'm really hoping the rework comes in here and fixes this up and gets these to be more things that can give the class more different identities. And speaking of identities, let's talk about finally the Keystones. For me personally, I think that the Warp Siphon Keystone and the Disrupt Destiny Keystone, these are good Keystones, right? The Warp Siphon is for casters. The Disrupt Destiny is for precision, but you can also use it with casting. And you could also use Warp Siphon with like precision stuff, of course. It does still work for that stuff. The one that stands out to me is the Empowered Psionics here. I don't necessarily think there should be a keystone that is independently devoted to turning your entire build into just using your blitz, right? That's effectively what this keystone says to do is, okay, if you're choosing this, you're just spamming assails, you're just using Brain Rupture, which no one uses, and then you're just casting Smite full time, right? I don't necessarily love that as a design element because I think the blitzes are kind of boring, and you shouldn't just be saying, ah, fuck it, who cares what melee or ranged weapons I'm bringing? I'm doing blitzes this game. That sucks. Like that just isn't that all that interesting. Blitzes should be a flavor additive for the class and not just a new definition for the entire build that erases every other choice that you make. That's my only thing here. The other thing I'd say about these Keystones is that Warp Siphon, to me, is pretty much just like the Execution Order on the Arbites. Remember, the Arbites does not have any cooldown reduction implicit in his tree, except for in one keystone called Execution Order, where he can get Malachiter for a 50% cooldown buff. And that means that that is the cooldown reduction keystone. This is the cooldown reduction keystone for this class, right? So if people want to go cooldown reduction, they should be forced to take Warp Siphon. They should not get the passive benefit of Psychonetics Aura always carrying their cooldown. I think that is just like, that's ridiculous. And this also has negative impacts because Disrupt Destiny and Empowered Psionics are incredibly powerful when paired with the right things, and it allows you to infinitely chain Scriers, infinitely chain whatever it is. And yeah, if you make this is something they learned in other classes but haven't seemingly learned here yet, if you make the cooldown independent of the abilities, it needs to come with a cost, right? You have to say like, okay, in order to get this cooldown, you must select this keystone in order to get it. And this is something they learned on the Zealot, which is that they removed the cooldown from just being easy as fuck for anybody to do. You have to do specific things to get it. It's much lower than it was before. And there's extra cooldown on the weaker abilities that need more cooldown. And the one that's strong, the Course of Spiritual Fortitude, that has, you know, a long cooldown and would be OP if you gave it more cooldown, it does not have any cooldown abilities linked with it. So because that's actually a good design. So I think that we could actually honestly be just fine if we just had this as the cooldown ability on this class, got rid of Psychonetics Aura, and that would be my balance changes. Okay, guys, well, hopefully that makes sense. So overall, you know, just make the blitzes more free to use, make them independent of the build, make them not dominate the build so much. Get rid of some of these trash nodes that clearly were just, you know, kept over from old times, and give us some more flavorful stuff that works for different weapons, especially things that aren't staves or works with stuff that is staves and not, so we can incentivize non-staff play. Get the bubble and the pain shield swapped. Scale down the scaling of Creeping Flames because it feeds directly into the already most powerful weapons OP-ness. And then Scrier's Gaze is probably okay if we can get rid of Psychonetics Aura. Empathic Evasion is too powerful a defensive mechanism on a class that isn't supposed to be about having that sort of defenses. And then finally, Empowered Psionics is a boring talent that forces you into using your blitz and only your blitz. The end. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one. I hope you liked this video. If you did, remember to subscribe, and bye-bye. Okay, bye.